Who would have thought that a dusty old poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, that had fallen into obscurity by the early 20th century, would become relevant again in the 21st century? But that's what happened with this poem. And yet, before we can talk about that thematic relevance, we need to look at the poem itself. And before we can do that, we need to make sure we understand the context of the poem. Some of you read the poem The Odyssey in high school. Actually, if you read it in high school, you only read part of it, because the whole thing is a book-length poem. Interestingly, it's one of the earliest pieces of literature we have, probably from the 8th century BC. The Odyssey tells the story of a guy named Odysseus. In the Latin, he was called Ulysses, same guy. He was a Greek general, and he went off to war in Troy, which is in modern-day Turkey. It doesn't look very far on a map, but in the most ancient of ancient times, it was like the other side of the world. The war itself took 10 years, and that is described in the other ancient Greek epic, the Iliad. The Odyssey describes Ulysses' journey home, which took 10 more years because he keeps encountering monsters and storms, and various gods get mad about this and that. But he does make it home, and everything is in horrible shape. But he straightens things out and is regarded as a great hero. And that's where the Odyssey ends. Now, the poem we're looking at is set several years after that. Ulysses is an old man. He's been ruling his kingdom, which is the small island of Crete, for a long time. And he's bored. Greece is a mountainous, rocky place of many islands, and Ulysses' kingdom is kind of a backwater with uneducated people and not much stimulation. So that's the setting of the poem. It was written by the well-known English poet of the 19th century, Alfred Lord Tennyson, in 1833, I think. Tennyson was famous in his day, but he's pretty well forgotten now, because his style and his thought processes don't translate very well to the 20th or the 21st century. Here's a picture, two pictures of Alfred Lord Tennyson, one when he was younger, one when he was older. In both, he looks pretty humorless. But even though Tennyson's style and his poetry have fallen out of fashion, this poem, Ulysses, is an exception. It's a poem about aging and about the challenges of living well as we age. And because we live in a world in which people are living longer and longer, the whole issue of aging well has taken on a greater significance. The one other preliminary thing I want to say before we start to look at the poem is that in form, this is a dramatic monologue. And we might remember that a dramatic monologue is a poem where a speaker speaks to a silent listener, and the setting and context gradually becomes clear. This poem is a little different from the classic dramatic monologue in that the setting keeps changing, and the audience keeps changing. The poem is in 3 sections, and we have a different setting and a different audience in each section. Okay, having said all of that, let's look at the poem. We'll take it a piece at a time. It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race, that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. Well, first of all, Ulysses seems to be by himself and talking to himself. That is suggested by the phrase, by this still hearth. A hearth is a fireplace. So he's in his castle or wherever. The fireplace is cold and he's unhappy. His wife is old. His kingdom is nothing but a lot of barren crags. A crag is sort of a rugged cliff. And all he does is administer, that's what meet and dole means, unequal laws to a people who are primitive and kind of savage. And he finds that to be a pointless exercise. It little profits him to do that. He's frustrated because these people don't know him. They hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. They're all about basic creature comforts. Their minds and their aspirations don't go any higher than a roof over their heads and the next meal. And in the next several lines, he tells us how he is different. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. Now, this business about drinking life to the lees is something we don't understand anymore. When one makes wine, especially if it's a homemade operation, there is always some sediment that settles at the bottom of the cask. That sediment is called the lees. So if you drink wine to the lees, you drink it all the way to the bottom. Ulysses tells us that that's what he intends to do with life, consume every possible drop. All times I have enjoyed greatly, and suffered greatly, both with those that loved me, and alone, on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vexed the dim sea. The Hyades were goddesses of rain, and we hear about them in the Odyssey. They brought great storms that Ulysses and his companions had to survive. And he tells us that he's experienced a lot in life, a lot of good times and bad times, but he's enjoyed them all. I am become a name, for always roaming with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. The most famous line in that passage is roaming with a hungry heart. The phrase hungry heart dovetails into the idea of drinking life to the lees. He wants to get as much as he can from life. He's known a lot, he's seen a lot, but he's not satisfied. He wants to see and know more. I am a part of all that I have met. Yet all experience is an arch, wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. I think it's true that we are a part of everything we've encountered and everyone we've met. All of our experiences help shape who we are. It's that next three-line sentence that sometimes gives people some trouble. All experience is like an arch, which is an entryway to an untraveled world with new experiences. But every time we go through that arch, which is a new experience, there's another one, and another one, and another one. There is always something new to be experienced and pursued. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. Unburnished means not polished. He compares himself to some kind of metal object that has been ignored, allowed to rust without being taken care of. As though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. He realizes that he's old, Not much of his life is left, but he wants to make the most of it. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. That eternal silence, of course, is death. He's saying that every hour we have is an hour saved from death, and we need to use it. And vile it were, vile means terrible, for some 3 sons to store and hoard myself, and this gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. I'm not too sure what that 3 sons is all about. The sons, perhaps, refer to seasons, but I don't know why 3. I do know that his point is that he yearns for action, for experience, for novelty. He wants to follow knowledge like a sinking star. So that is part 1 of the poem. It defines the circumstances and the mindset of Ulysses. In the next podcast, we'll look at sections 2 and 3 and consider the theme and significance of this poem.